Hi, everyone. Welcome to the July 23rd edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. This week on the podcast, we're going to discuss Haskell weekend, the main event, the Haskell Invitational from last Saturday, as well as an unusual card of stakes races at Monmouth Park on Saturday that was run a little bit later than expected. We'll also travel to Saratoga to discuss their week there, the second week of this summer meet, where they ran the Coaching Club American Oaks on Sunday, rescheduled from Saturday since there was a heat wave all up and down the eastern seaboard, which caused some races to be moved from Saturday to Sunday. And we'll also discuss some stakes action from Del Mar, their opening weekend where they ran the Eddie Reed and the San Diego handicaps. So I'll go ahead and welcome in my co-host, Craig Milkowski. Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I can confirm the heat wave was everywhere, not just the East Coast. It was really hot here in Oklahoma, but we sent it your way by Saturday and Sunday, so I hope you got to enjoy a little bit of it. But otherwise, I'm doing well. I thought it turned out to be a pretty fun week in racing, and excited by a few of the performances and looking forward to talking about them.
Yeah, it's weird to have just such a widespread weather event all across the country. It's unusual. But yeah, it was pretty hot here in Saratoga on Saturday. I'm sure it was even hotter down in the city where I usually would be at this time of year. But yeah, we got the races in. Some hiccups along the way, but they all happened. We'll begin at Monmouth Park with the Haskell Invitational, run a little bit after 8 p.m. Eastern time. With all those races being run later in the afternoon on Saturday's card, when some races also being canceled. Maximum Security, he got the job done. He just keeps rising to every challenge. I've been a doubter of this horse in the past. I was not that impressed with his Florida Derby because of the pace situation. I was sort of turned into a believer in the Kentucky Derby and wanted to see him do it again. He did it again here, and he has to be considered the leader of the division at this point.
He does. I think he really stepped up here, both visually and figure-wise. He got a very nice 128 TimeformUS speed figure, which is about the par for older males. So for a 3-year-old to do it in late July, it signals that he's a really good horse. He's not a horse beaten up on a weak crop. I know we've talked about it a few times, but it was a good effort. He went fast early. He was able to track just off the fast pace. He was right up on it, maybe a length back at the most. But he proved he doesn't have to be right on the lead. And just nothing bad to say about it. I thought the top two ran great races. Mucho Gusto got a 127 in defeat. He came from a few lengths back and just a really good run. And even the third place finisher, Spun the Run, who we hadn't seen since March, ran a very nice 119. He's been a promising horse all along, but this was quite a step up in class coming off a layoff. And though he was pretty far back in third, I thought even he ran very well.
Yeah, I was thinking about it a little bit, why some of us have been reluctant to give Maximum Security the credit that he's due. And it's probably due to the fact that he began his career in such an unusual fashion, starting out in that $16,000 maiden claiming race. And I think we're all just a little skeptical of whether or not the clock would strike midnight at some point and he wouldn't be able to keep going on and stepping up and becoming the kind of horse that he suggested he might be. But that hasn't happened. He just keeps getting better, and I've got to give him all of the credit. He really impressed me in this race. He was just in the teeth of that pace the entire way, took multiple challenges. It briefly seemed like Mucho Gusto had a chance of going past him, but crossing the wire, it even seemed like Maximum Security was pulling away from him again. So this horse can get as far as 1.25 miles. He can do it by setting a slow pace. He can do it by being involved in a faster pace. He's just incredibly versatile, and he's just really good, as you were saying. I've got no knocks on him. We do have to discuss the incident on the far turn a little bit. I know some people were saying that maybe Maximum Security should have been disqualified for it. I don't know. Yes, King for a Day was probably cost a position, but I think it's really difficult to say anything with certainty that would happen because of the bad camera angles.
Yeah, it's really sad that in 2019, that's the best we can do in horse racing. But I agree with you. There was no look where you could definitively say that he did anything that deserved a disqualification. All I can say, hopefully the technology will get better sooner rather than later when we could have a real look at it. But to be fair, he was the best horse in the race. King for a Day, he wasn't winning this race. Maybe it cost him third, maybe not. It's tough to say. And I really am not the kind of guy that wants to see DQs on something like that.
No, I mean, if there was a camera angle that was adequate and it showed that Maximum Security had come over on King for a Day severely, this would be the kind of situation where you might have to disqualify a horse for costing another horse a position. I understand that argument, and I think it's a valid argument because a lot of the stewards across the country have been getting more consistent about that recently. But that said, you can't make that case without actually seeing the camera angles, and they just weren't available. So I don't think it's really an argument worth having. King for a Day, all of that aside, he just didn't really show up in this race. He was out of horse, seemingly coming around the far turn. Sure, that instant cost him a few lengths and all of his momentum, but you could tell he wasn't winning this race, probably leaving the half-mile pole. So Maximum Security stepped forward out of the Pegasus. It just seemed like King for a Day really didn't. It was interesting to compare the time of this race to the Monmouth Cup, which was run earlier on the card, because they were both contested over 1.125 miles. And I even tweeted after the Monmouth Cup, I'll be very surprised if the Haskell horses were able to surpass this final time, because it seemed like the two horses that did well in this race, War Story and Bar Harbor, had run so well. But that was the case. These were both fast races, it turns out. But take nothing away from these two horses in the Monmouth Cup, these older horses, because War Story was really game to hold off Bar Harbor, who ran a winning race, just couldn't quite get by him late.
Yeah, I thought it was a good effort. War Story's a really puzzling horse. He just seems to run really big races at times. He throws in complete stinkers at other times. But, he just keeps showing up, and I guess you gotta always think he's dangerous when he gives his best. Am I going to bet him coming back off? He ran a 125 here, which is certainly good, above the grade 3 par average, probably closer to a grade 2. But, I would say I'd be a little leery getting a Jorge Navarro horse away from Monmouth. I think we probably expected his best there. That's probably where he's going to run best, is what I'm trying to say. Bar Harbor ran very well in defeat with a 124. And the real disappointment in the race at 4-5 was the Todd Pletcher trained Coal Front, who, had a fairly easy lead and just didn't have much when they turned for home.
Yeah, Coal Front, maybe he's just not the same horse since coming back from Dubai. I know he got a much higher speed figure in the Met Mile in his prior start, but let's remember, he was on the rail in that mile with really no excuse other than being close to an honest pace that day, and he just backed up with other horses racing outside of him on the worst part of the track, passing him in the late stages. So that mile really wasn't a good effort for Coal Front, and he took another step backwards here. So you never know how these trips to Dubai are going to affect horses, because Coal Front did seem to be on an upward trajectory earlier in the year, but he just hasn't carried that forward. I agree with what you were saying about War Story. The story of this horse's career is that he pops these big figures every so often and just doesn't always put them back to back. He's a little inconsistent. It's nice to see him bounce back from the Brooklyn, because I don't know what happened that day. He just was out of horse about halfway through the race and was basically eased to the wire. It looked like that might be a career-ending kind of race for a horse like him who's getting up there in age. But Jorge Navarro, to his credit, got him back to one of his better efforts here. And he ran well. He's done it before, and he did it again. Bar Harbor was the surprise of this race, because he had never run a speed figure like this before. And he's only a 4-year-old, so I guess he can be improving at this point in the year. And if he can carry this momentum forward, he's a force in the handicap division. But I'd want to see it again against a tougher field in the future.
I would as well, and he definitely hung a little bit in the lane. I mean, I think he actually had the lead with a furlong to go. If not, he was right there and looked like he was going to go by. And War Story just dug down on the rail, which you don't see very often, was able to get the win.
The other dirt race that was run as a stakes on Saturday at Monmouth was the Molly Pitcher for the fillies and mares, a grade 3 going 1.16 miles. This race featured a very different pace scenario than either the Haskell or the Monmouth Cup, and I think that affected the final time quite a bit. Midnight Bisou, she was the 1-9 favorite coming in, really wasn't facing any legitimate rival in this race. She had to work a little bit harder than some people might have expected, but that was really due to the fact that she was not ridden to win the race by a larger margin than she actually did, because it turned into basically a quarter-mile sprint to the wire, and she had the best sprint of anybody, but there was no way she was going to open up and win this race by 5 lengths. She collects her 5th win so far in 2019 from as many starts. There's just really nothing to fault about her. This was a stepping stone to a goal later in the year.
Yeah, it was an odd spot. Obviously, it was just a paid workout, basically. She had this field completely over a barrel. As a speed figure maker, it was basically completely impossible. You couldn't possibly use this race with the Haskell and the Monmouth Cup, for example, because if you do, you're going to go ahead and inflate those races and make them look faster than they were. So I basically just had to rate this race in isolation. And even though doing so, because the rest of the field was, fairly weak coming in, to be honest, Midnight Bisou was only able to get a 110. I wouldn't put much stock in that at all as far as she goes. The other horses that ran behind her basically fell in line with what they've been running. So I'm just going to treat this one like the paid workout that it was, and setting her up for what I assume is going to be a try again at 9 furlongs where she's going to face some tougher competition and probably run into Elite again, I would think.
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting aspect of this race is will we see a much better performance from Midnight Bisou when she gets to the personal ensign at Saratoga, where I would assume she's going next. I believe that her connections have stated that this race was just a prep for that later goal. I would assume she'll get back to those mid 120 kind of numbers. The real question for Midnight Bisou is, can she duplicate her better performances like we saw in the Ogden Phipps going the 9 furlongs, because she really is this mile and a 16th specialist. And I know it's a very minor difference, but it's been a significant difference for her in the past. And also, can she do it at Saratoga? Because I think it's fair to say she ran her 2 worst races of last year at Saratoga, where she was no match for Monomoy Girl in the coaching club. Monomoy Girl just dominated that race last year. And then she was a very disappointing 3rd in the Alabama. I'm sure the 10 furlongs didn't help there. But I think Midnight Bisou still has something to prove coming into the personal ensign, even though she is coming into the race undefeated this year. We saw Late be so impressive last week in the Delaware Handicap. And we'll discuss some of the Shuvee horses later in the podcast, but I assume they'll be pointed to that race as well. So it should be a fun matchup between all of these or among all of these horses. Midnight Bisou, though, she's obviously the horse to beat.
Yeah, I'm not so quick to write her off at the 9 furlongs. I mean, she still is a young filly. She just, she's 4 this year. I'd be more concerned personally with the Saratoga angle than I would that extra half a furlong. As somebody who watched her at Oaklawn, the result of those races wasn't changing if it was another 16th of a mile. I'm pretty confident in that. So, I'm not just going to pigeonhole her into being a mile and a 16th horse as a young filly who's still developing. It's, as I said, I'd be a little more worried that she didn't seem to handle Saratoga at all.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like I'm being really hard on her because, I mean, if the Eclipse Award voting was today, I'm sure she'd be a unanimous winner in this division. She's just done everything that's been asked of her so far, and she probably is going to handle the 9 furlongs. It's just the personal ensign, it's not going to be a walkover. There are some nice horses in there, so I think both of us are interested to see how she stacks up with Elate, given the fact that Elate's improved a little bit over the past couple of months. We'll discuss the final 2 stakes races from Saturday at Monmouth Park. Both of them run on the turf. The Oceanport, just a 4-horse field, not the toughest field in the world. Just Howard got the job done in this grade 3 event over Divisidero. Divisidero was a grade 1 type of horse at one time in the past. He's just not anymore, and it feels like Just Howard took advantage of a horse that just passed his prime.
Yeah, these horses ran basically grade 3 type numbers. Just Howard got a 121. Divisidero got a 120. And those are probably even a little bit inflated due to the small fields. It was really a shame that on Monmouth's big day, they had to run in the heat and just had short fields for what would normally be very well bet races with, big, strong fields, usually competitive. Sad to see. I thought these were decent efforts, but none of these are really horses I'm looking forward to betting back in the upper echelons of the division.
Yeah, no, it is a shame because this was supposed to be an exciting card with a great wagering menu, and it just didn't turn out to be that way with all of the scratches and connections. I would imagine not wanting to run under the circumstances. And yeah, it's just unfortunate that it happened this way. With the field that actually ran in this race, yeah, it's a grade 3 event at best. Divisidero, I don't know why they're pressing on with this horse. I don't know what he has left to prove. He's a 2-time grade 1 winner. He just seems to have some hang in him these days. He still makes that effective run and gets there, but just doesn't quite seal the deal. I was amazed to look up and actually see that he is 7 years old because it doesn't feel like that long ago that he was just a 3-year-old winning on Derby Day. But yeah, I would imagine he's winding down to the end of his career at this point because he's done a lot. Just Howard, he's stepping up, and it just seems like he's getting better little by little. I don't think we're ever going to see him running against the best horses in this division, but I thought he was pretty game to get the victory here.
Yeah, no argument with that. It's just, it is what it is. It was a small field grade 3 race. I'm not going to get too excited about it. just move on to the next one.
Yep, and that next one was the Philly version of the race, the Matchmaker, going the same distance, actually, no, a mile and an eighth rather. Just a 3-horse field, shorter than the Oceanport field, and a perplexing race to watch, a frustrating race to watch. I don't know what the idea was in some of these riders' heads that they did not want to press this leader through an opening quarter in 27 and change. It's just really bizarre why you'd want to turn these races into basically quarter horse races, which is what they are when you go that slowly in the early going. And I don't think it's unfair to say that the horse that might have been the third best horse in the race won the race.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Like you said, it was a completely tactical race. It's baffling. Of course, I'm not a jockey. I'm about double the size you need to be one, but I'm pretty sure if I was on a 2-5 favorite, I wouldn't be letting the horse aloof alone, just going as slow as they want and trying to outfinish them. I guess that's how, for all the comments you say, I guess that's how Chad Brown wants his horses ridden. He wants them to conserved early and ridden late, but it just seems silly in a field like this. I don't know why they let this horse get away with it. The top two both got 124 TimeformUS speed figures. Of course, all the fractions are coded in blue. If we had like a heavy blue, they would be in that. We don't really differentiate there, but just a race as a handicapper for all involved. I'll probably put a line through next time and try to base how I'm going to bet these horses on other races rather than this one, because I think it's just a bit of an aberration, and not much else to say about it. Just ugly. It gets a little tiresome seeing these paceless races over and over again.
Yeah, at first my thought was to question the speed figure a little bit, but then I kind of was thinking what you were saying, that whether it's a 124 or whether it's a 112, which I'm sure you could have gone lower if you had not accounted for the pace situation, it's just not a race that you want to put a whole lot of stock in, because it wasn't even really a race. It was just sort of an experiment with these 3 horses to see what would happen if they went as slowly as possible early and ran home. Competition of ideas. She's better than this. And with a more favorable pace setup in the future, I think we'll see a better performance out of her. She probably is the best horse of these 3. It didn't work out that way. The winner, I'm so fancy. I don't want to take anything away from her. She's obviously improving and she's done well in this country, but she was lucky to win this race. And the final thing that I want to say is, I feel like there's this idea in the heads of connections that you're playing it safe by going slowly on the front end, when what you're actually doing is creating more chaos, because you don't know if your horse has the fastest burst of speed going a quarter mile. And that's what you're betting on when you go this slowly in the early going. It's not a truly run race. It's not a mile and an eighth race anymore. And it just bothers me that people think that's playing it safe when that's actually the opposite of playing it safe. So hopefully this trend towards extremely slow pace situations turns around at some point. But I don't see that in the future, but we can always hope.
I do want to mention, I still would give a shot next time to Toriga. I thought, given the scenario, we don't really know what to make of her. Like I said, I'm not going to put a whole lot of stock in her figure, but she was a good horse shipping in from South America, and I would be willing to give her a shot in a more realistically run race too.
No, that's actually a good point. It's good that you mentioned Toriga, because she arguably did have the toughest trip in this race. I know she saved ground, but she wanted to go a faster pace. You could see John Velasco was having a lot of trouble restraining her in the early going. And it's just hard to fight your rider for that long and have any finish left. And she still was in trouble in the stretch between horses without a lot of space to run. It's amazing that a horse could get into that much trouble in a 3-horse field. But when they go this slowly up front, that's what happens. It's funny. We've seen, or I've really probably seen 2 3-turn races, 3-horse races that I've watched in the past couple of weeks. One was this one, and one was an off-the-turf race at Saratoga, which also featured just a mind-bogglingly slow pace, and a horse got in trouble in that race somehow. It's just amazing that horses can get in trouble in these situations. But when you go slowly up front, chaos occurs, and that's what happened in these races. We'll move on to Saratoga, where the feature race on Sunday's card, and what happened at Saratoga was the card that was originally scheduled for Saturday, they announced earlier in the week that was going to be canceled and moved to Sunday, where they ran a steeplechase race and the Shuvee, which was originally scheduled for Sunday as the bookends to the original Saturday card of 11 races. So it was just this mammoth 13 race card on Saturday at Saratoga. The feature was the Coaching Club American Oaks, and Guarana, she was the headline attraction coming in off her very impressive score in the Acorn last time, trying the 2 turns for the first time, trying the mile and eighth for the first time. And she passed the test, I guess, but was it really that much of a test in the end? I don't think so.
No, and I hate to say the horse wasn't very impressive in winning, but if you base it on her Acorn, I think you had to be a little disappointed. She only ran a 113 speed figure after a 126 that day. Maybe some of it was the track. It was that pretty rail bias track, if memory serves. Maybe a little bit of it was the second turn and the added distance. And she did get the job done, but the horses behind her, Point of Honor and Off Topic, they're just okay. I wouldn't say they're division leaders by any means. So personally, I was expecting a little more impressive performance. Part of it could have been, once again, we had a fairly slow pace for this race. And, maybe they didn't want to send her worrying about that extra furlong in the second turn. But he did get the job done, but I wasn't blown away by any means.
No, I agree with that. And I know none of the pace figures in this race are color-coded blue because this pace was faster than the Shuvee, which we'll talk about a little bit later over the same course and distance. But it was a moderate to slow pace. I'm sure it was almost color-coded blue, if you could say that. And Guarana, clearly the intention was not to win by the same kind of margin that they did in the Acorn, because to do that, you'd have to go faster early to create some separation and not turn it into a sprint to the wire, which is what it was. I mean, you don't often see the fourth quarter in a dirt race go in 23-3, and that's what we saw in this race. Horses just typically can't sprint that fast coming home on the dirt because they're not going so slowly early. The fact that a horse like Off Topic finished as close as she did in third is a little bit of an indictment of the form of this race, because Off Topic has been a decent enough allowance type of horse, grade 3 type of horse in the past, if you can even call her that. She's not really a grade 1 type. I'm sure the mile and eighth distance did move her up a little bit, but it's hard to make the speed figure any higher than what you gave it, because a horse like her did finish third. Point of Honor, she arguably ran the best race because she was against the pace situation. She was wide coming around the second turn. She took a really good shot at Guarana late. I don't think Guarana drifting really affected Point of Honor at all, so I have no problem with that objection being dismissed pretty quickly. But Point of Honor is a horse that's moving in the right direction, and if Guarana does skip the Alabama as is expected, I think Point of Honor is going to be tough in that race.
Yeah, I was probably a little quick to just dismiss her as not a division leader. She's actually been running well. She won on the Black Eyed Susan, coming from well off the pace, and she's definitely got some finish in her. So, she clearly is a horse that probably is best at this mile and an eighth, and maybe would even like a little longer. But, so maybe I rode her off a little fast. She certainly ran well, and I don't disagree that she may have been the best horse in the race.
Yeah, and Guarana, I'm not surprised they're a little reluctant to tackle a mile and a quarter with her based on this performance. I know Chad Brown is saying that he thinks mile and a quarter is no problem, but you can say that quite easily when you don't plan on running in the race. And I think the mile and a 16th of the cotillion will fit her much better. So no surprise that she's probably going to end up there. She was so brilliant in the Acorn, and yeah, sure, being on the rail probably helped her a little bit, but I think it was more than that. She is a really brilliantly fast horse with enough stamina to get the mile. So I'd like to see them ride her a little more aggressively in the future. I think we'll see a speed figure bump coming her way if they do that next time out, because I just feel like this is a race we didn't learn a whole lot, anything new about her, because they didn't really try to show us that.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And I think it's interesting to note that the fillies this year just aren't that fast. I mean, if the distaff was next week or, next month even, I don't think any of these 3-year-olds will really be considered real contenders. Where we're not really seeing that with the colts. There's not a big gap between the 3-year-olds and the older. But with the fillies, I'm just not seeing it yet. There's still time for a few of them to step up and get faster and develop, but it's not happening at this point.
Yeah, and that's obviously with the exception of Guarana's Acorn, which is just sort of an outlier in the division. All of the other speed figures, as you were saying, are significantly lower than that. I think 10 points or more lower than that, and just not in the same league as the kind of numbers that Midnight Bisou has been putting up. So, yeah, if the Breeders' Cup Distaff were run today and Guarana does not run her Acorn, it's all Midnight Bisou in that combined division with the fillies and mares. The others, or they ran two other stakes races on Sunday's card at Saratoga. Before we get to the Shuvee that was run at the same distance as the Coaching Club, we'll discuss the 11th race, the Caress, going 5.5 furlongs on the turf for the fillies and mares. And this was the race that busted up a lot of people's pick 5, pick 4, pick 6 tickets as the two favorites, Significant Form and Morticia. They both finished off or I think maybe there was a dead heat for third. But they both finished out of the exacta as Mamanu, big long shot in this race for Jimmy Toner, just wired the field on the front end.
She did, and I think we can give a little tip of the hat to our pace projector, which actually had this tabbed as a race without a lot of speed and favoring horses on her near the early lead. And we actually had her projected right up front. So at 29-1 odds, if you wanted to take a swing at her, you did okay in this race for sure. Fire Key ran well. It wasn't like she set a slow pace either. We had a 127 pace figure through the first quarter mile. So, she wasn't stealing anything on the front end. She just was the best horse on this day. Perhaps it's a little short for Significant Form, though. To be honest, turning into the stretch, it looked like she had every chance to win and just came up really flat. So not sure what to make of it. The winner got a 116 overall TimeformUS speed figure, 113 for Fire Key, which is right about what she runs almost every time out. So, solid enough filly and mare sprinters, and one where just the front runner got out there, avoided trouble, and was able to win.
Yeah, I think Significant Form is fascinating from a handicapping perspective because she really illustrates the difference between those 7 furlong turf sprints at Belmont and the true 5.5 turf sprints, which require just a different kind of speed that the horses that go those longer sprint distances often don't possess, because you can be a miler and have no trouble turning back and getting the 7 furlong turf sprint at Belmont and just not really be in the same league of the true turf sprinters going these 5 and 5.5 distances. And I think Significant Form is a great example of that on the racetrack. Morticia, I do want to talk about her trip a little bit because she probably should have won this race. And I think Tyler Gaffalione would probably want this ride back since he just was not that aggressive coming out of the gate, put her in behind the speed early, and it just was not coming back to him at any point. And when a horse like Mamanu is wiring the field, you're just not going to find the gaps to get a hole to run through at the top of the stretch. And she really was in quite a bit of trouble coming through the lane, just without a clear path. And she was running on well at the end, but it was way too late when she finally got into the clear. She's a better horse than this, but it's just a little unfortunate that she couldn't get this win at Saratoga.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned that's why speed's always dangerous, because if there's one thing you can say about it, it avoids trouble. And there's no doubt Morticia found plenty of it in here, and it definitely cost her the race.
Yeah, for sure. The final stakes race on Sunday's card at Saratoga was the Shuvee, as I said, run at the same distance as the Coaching Club Merrick Oaks. This for the 4-year-olds and older fillies and mares. And there were two big fillies in this race, Wowcat and She's a Julie. They both went down to defeat to Golden Award for Bill Mott, who's a nice horse. She's been stepping up consistently over the past couple of seasons and finally got her graded stakes win here. She's I don't want to take anything away from her, but I will say that the pace situation of this race definitely played into her favor.
It did. This was a race I just couldn't bring myself to bet. And the only opinion I really had was that I was totally against She's a Julie. I just didn't like her race at all at Churchill last time. It looked like she was going off form to me. It didn't look like she wanted any parts of 1 1/8, which I think we can probably say definitively here after this one, because she was right up on that slow pace and just had nothing for the top two turning for home. Otherwise, decent effort for Golden Award. She basically ran the same figure she's been running. She got a 112. Solid return for Wowcat. She does seem to run second a lot, but she didn't have much pace to run into. She wasn't too far off of it, but she was definitely at a disadvantage. We have all the pace figures coded in blue again for this race. Seemed to happen a lot this weekend, but So like I said, good return for her. I would expect better next time out. I'm not going to be too excited about the winner or She's a Julie.
No, I agree. She's a Julie. Her last race, I think you could have looked at it either way. You could have said, oh, well, she just faced two really good horses in Blue Prize and a late. Or you could have said she had no excuse to lose that race given the setup. And I think that was the right strategy or the right outlook going into this race, because she had no excuse today or in this race on Sunday. She just was awful. I mean, she was out of horse coming around the far turn. Golden Award, who was up on the pace with her, just easily put her away. I didn't like this effort from She's a Julie at all. I did like the effort from Wildcat quite a bit. And I'll admit, I'm one of this horse's biggest fans. I really liked her last year. I liked her Beldame. I liked her Breeders' Cup Distaff quite a bit, where I thought she arguably could have won that race with a different trip. And Wildcat's a horse that needed a race off the long layoff last year. Actually needed two races because she was not very good in the Shuvee, where she came back last year, and again in the Personal Ensign before she ran two bang-up races to end the year. And she probably just needed this race as well. I will say that she did make a move into the fastest part of the race coming around the far turn. If you look at the pace of this race, if you believe the fractions, and I think there's no reason not to, they went the half in 50 and 1, and they went to the mile in 137 and 1. So that means they ran a 47 flat second half mile after a 50 and 2 first half mile. And she moved into that part of the race to try to get closer to the leader. And she just kind of flattened out late. A horse has every right to do that coming off a layoff. She's a horse that has no problem getting a mile and an eighth, probably could go even farther than that based on her Chilean races. So Wildcat's a horse that I would give a look to in the Personal Ensign next time. I know that's coming up a really tough race. Maybe she needs to take another step forward, even from the race that she ran last year, to be competitive against horses like Midnight Bisou and a late. But I'm a fan of Wildcat, and I want to see how she progresses in these upcoming 4 weeks.
Yeah, one thing I wish we had in our past performances, when you go to fractions, you can switch between cumulative and incremental. So you can see the individual times, but we don't have that with figures. But if you look in our charts, he went from a 92 after a half mile to a 104. And if we did incremental pace figures instead of just cumulative, that section of the race would actually come out to a 128. So she was really moving during that point of the race. And that's a really good point. That's something I'm going to push for more, and hopefully we can get that implemented, because it is good to see how well these horses move during particular portions of the race, particularly depending where they are. If it's on a turn, if they're losing ground or saving ground. You can really find some hot moves this way that horses are making.
And that will be reflected, correct me if I'm wrong, but that will be reflected over time in a horse's late pace rating and how fast they're able to finish off the races. And if you look at the TimeformUS early and late pace ratings, which surround horses' running styles and their PPs, you can see how fast these horses are actually finishing and which ones are most likely to take advantage of pace situations in the future. But I agree, it would be fascinating to see that just for this one race, how fast she was actually coming home compared to some of the other horses, because you do want to be aware of that stuff when you're looking at horses making moves at different parts of a race. We'll take a look at some other races from Sunday that were not stakes races. One of them was an allowance race, which one is the 10th, going 7 furlongs. And Baracho, a 3-year-old, was stepping up to face older horses, using this race as a prep for the Grade 1 H. Allen Jerkins later in the summer on Travers Day. And I thought he got everything out of this race that the connections were looking for. He won fairly easily, I think. Didn't run the fastest speed figure in the world, but I just liked the visual impression that he put forth.
Yeah, I thought he ran well. I wouldn't even think this was a race worthy of discussing if he wasn't a 3-year-old. But the fact he was able to beat some decent older horses, I'm not going to say they're stakes horses because they're not. We had Restoring Hope in here of Belmont Stakes fame last year. Identity Politics, who's been a little bit of a disappointment based on his reputation, at least I would say. But as a 3-year-old to go out and beat older, that's never an easy thing, particularly this early in July. He got a nice 109 TimeformUS speed figure. He had won 111 and 113 the last couple times out. So a good effort from him. I think 7 furlongs is probably the perfect distance for him. 6 is probably a little too short. A mile, maybe a 1-turn mile would be good for him. But I think the 7 hits him right between the eyes. So I look forward. I imagine he would be trying some stakes competition again soon. And just kind of depends if he can get a race with some pace to set up his kick, because he definitely has a nice move on the turn and finishing kick.
Yeah, he does. And I like that he showed a bit better tactical speed in this race to be up close. And I'm sure he's going to be one of the choices coming up in the Alan Jerkins, that grade one race on Travers Day. And based on the division, the state of the division that we observed in the Woody Stevens, that is a wide open race. So I'm sure a horse like this would be considered in a spot like that. Uh, the final race we'll discuss on Sunday at Saratoga was a maiden race for the 2-year-olds, where Basin, Steve Asmussen, second-time starter, got the job done over a Jeremiah Engelhardt, second-time starter, 3 technique. And I just want to highlight this race because it earned a decent speed figure of 101. That's pretty good for the 2-year-olds. And I like both of these horses. I think they both have futures.
They did. They both ran very well. Basin obviously improved quite a bit off her first start to get a 101 for her win here. Jeremiah Engelhardt, who seems to be just blooming with 2-year-olds all of a sudden, which is, always good to see some new guys getting some good quality young stock. And I think he's a very good trainer. So good to see. Just not used to seeing his name with the 2-year-olds. But they clearly both ran very well. Big gap back to third and Lucky Curl in there. Just a really good effort. And what I like about these races is they're finally starting to stretch out to 6 furlongs. I always have a hard time kind of taking these 5 and 5.5 furlong races seriously, especially as a speed figure, guys. The speed figures are difficult to make at these distances. The run-ups get played around with a little bit. And they're just not always representative. A lot of horses are really trying to win that first time out. Others are sent out, maybe ready, but it's not the goal. And some are just sent out for exercise. So seeing a horse like this jump up, it's really not surprising. He didn't fool too many with that, 2-to-1 odds. It wasn't a huge shock that was able to win the race here, but solid effort. And I just really like seeing him at 6 furlongs.
I agree with that. And this horse, I just will point out, in his debut at Churchill Downs, was second to By Your Side, who won the Sanford a few weeks ago, or rather last week. So that's obviously a strong race, and both of these horses are nice 2-year-olds. 3 Technique, who was second, he ran a fast race in his debut at Belmont, and basically ran the same race here. So I agree with everything you said. I like both of these horses. They handled the 6 furlongs, all good signs. And actually, all the 2-year-old races we're going to discuss from this past weekend at Saratoga are 6 furlong races, and there are 3 Jeremiah Engelhardt horses to discuss. We'll get to the other ones in a second, but before we get to the other 2-year-old races, we'll discuss Friday's card, sort of going in reverse chronological order, where they ran the Chad Brown Stakes, also known as the Lake George, as Regal Glory, probably the least regarded of the Chad Brown runners, got the job done over her 2 stablemates.
Yeah, Regal Glory had actually won a stakes race. I think it was the Penn Oaks, right, at Penn National on their big day. And I remember that race. It was a tough speed figure to make, and I wound up siding on just using the clock. There was really no evidence to go against that and the similar race for 3-year-olds for the males that was run that day. So she got kind of a lowish 95 speed figure, and even looking back, I don't have a problem with it. I think it was just a case she ran just fast enough to win. Because if you go to her prior races, she was as good as the other 2 on here from that speed figure perspective. Hard to say a whole lot about this race. I mean, you basically had 3 stablemates racing against each other after all the scratches, and they actually all got, the top 2 got a 108, the third runner got a 105. And again, these probably get maybe a hair inflated when all the horses are able to save ground, because you're just not going to lose much ground in a 3-horse field for the most part. But decent enough effort, but I don't think these are really graded stakes fillies that we're looking at here, despite I think this is a grade 3 now. It used to be a grade 2. But it's probably borderline grade 3, and I think that's what we got.
Yeah, with regard to that Penn Oaks, I think I actually sent you one of my famous Craig, I have a problem with this speed figure emails about that race, because it was higher originally. It's funny, though, looking back in retrospect from that Penn Oaks, both the winner, Regal Glory, and the second place finisher, Ala Sail, have both come back to show significant speed figure improvement in their subsequent starts. So I think you can make the case that I was actually wrong about that race, and we should have gone with the original higher number. But it's one that can go either way because it was not a strong field behind those 2. But the things I do want to say, just to wrap up the Lake George briefly, because there's not a lot to say about this race with regard to the merits of the 3 runners, is credit to Chad Brown for running his horses, because I know he gets a lot of flack for trading so many good horses and just having such a concentration of talent in his barn, but everybody else scratched out of this race. I know that one horse got sick and Wesley Ward just thought it was too tough, or I don't know what the story was with the third horse, but Chad Brown actually ran his horses. And not only that, Chad Brown didn't just leave it up to the riders to say, okay, go 27, 52 to the half, and we'll sprint home and not take anything out of our horses. He actually had a plan. He said, blowout's going to the lead. Regal Gore is sitting in behind. There's going to be an honest pace in this race, and it was executed. So it was just a 3-horse race, but it was a real horse race. And I just want to give credit to the connections for that, because these horses do all have different owners.
I agree with you. I saw him taking a lot of flack on Twitter, and if anybody deserves blame, it's not Chad Brown. He's the one running his horses, and he's running against himself. So, in this case, I can understand not wanting to run against him because his barn's loaded. But, it's hard to knock him. He's doing what he has to do. He has the horses. You can't blame a guy for his success. It's even hard to blame owners for sending the guy his horses. I mean, I'm not sure what else you can do other than try to entice the others to take them on, and they didn't want to do it here. And to be honest, it wasn't that strong of a race, so some probably missed an opportunity where they could have got some graded stakes black type.
Yeah, we'll talk about the San Clemente of Del Mar in a second, but I'm not sure why Wesley Ward sent his filly out there, Stillwater Cove, when she would have been the controlling speed in this race. But some people just get scared of Chad Brown for some reason. I don't know. But you've got to run in these races to have a chance to win them. Moving away from the stakes races, on Friday's card, we'll discuss another one of those 2-year-old events, a maiden race that was won by a Jeremiah Engelhardt horse, Sweet Kisses. This was another second-time starter of his. She had made her debut at Belmont, running a much slower race, but she really showed a lot of improvement here. But this is a race that I think a lot of people will talk about for the third-place finisher more than the winner.
Oh, yes. She kind of broke slow. Is that the one you're talking about, Miss Danvers?
Yeah, Mrs. Danvers.
Yeah, she broke slow, made a nice move, and just hung a bit late. But, she certainly ran well. She got a 97, which would win a whole lot of these races. And personally, I thought the top 3 all ran well. Fine Night from the Steve Asmussen barn ran well to get 100. And Sweet Kisses was really impressive. She sat off the pace a couple lengths, which you don't always see with these 2-year-olds, and she was able to run by, and he was actually pulling away late. So I think this is going to turn out to be a very strong maiden race.
I agree with that totally. Sweet Kisses really took a step forward. She had actually been second to Kiss the Girl in her debut, who came back and showed improvement when she was second in the Schuylerville, that sloppy track race on opening weekend at Saratoga. So that might have been a stronger race than it seems at Belmont that she was coming out of. And Finite, who was second in this race for Steve Asmussen, has a lot of pedigree. I believe the Dam is a full sister to Tapiture, who's over $1 million earner and a sire now. And Mrs. Danvers, just really excited about her. Actually went down to the paddock at Saratoga to check out these horses, and she's just a really cool-looking horse, one of those light gray 2-year-olds. And she's just got the most royal pedigree you can imagine by Tappet, out of a half-sister to Warfront. So she's really bred to be a good one, and she'll probably improve with distance. She was very great in this race and wide, as you were saying. And just one that I imagine will get hammered next time out, because people love to bet these Shug McGahee second-time starters off performances like this. But I think it's pretty deserved in this case, because this was not only a troubled trip, but a fast race.
It was, and it was anytime you see a Shug horse bet the 5-2, a 2-year-old first-time starter, there's been some talent shown in the mornings. I mean, there was no real surprise here. She wasn't able to get the win, but she's clearly a talented filly.
Yeah, moving on to Thursday's card, working it backwards in time. The feature on Thursday was a stakes for the 2-year-old fillies earlier in the day, which we'll talk about. But the 9th race on the card was an allowance race going 1 1/8 on the dirt, and it featured Hofburg, one of the most talked about 3-year-olds from last season, a horse that I think a lot of people were looking forward to betting in the Travers before he had to miss that race at Saratoga last year. And he got back to the winner's circle in this race, wasn't beating the toughest field to do it, not really sure what to make of this race overall. He looked great, but I think he's going to have to do better in the future to really be considered a force in the handicap division.
Yeah, it's a really tough race to make figures for. I originally had him at a 114. This was one of the ones you wrote to me, and rightfully so. I had mentioned I was going to take a closer look at it, and I did go back, and I wound up settling on a 118, which I'm actually really happy with now that I look at the chart and the rest of the field. I wound up kind of splitting the variant on the day. But Pace told the story here. But the problem with Hofburg is he's never run particularly fast. So if you're going to bet him when he steps up in class and invariably, I assume, would try stakes races next time out, based on this effort, you're really taking a leap of faith that he's a horse who can run fast. And I don't think at this point that we really know.
Yeah, I mean, he's won enough races at this point that I think he's raced through most of his allowance conditions. So I would imagine they're going to have to go on to a stakes race. Like, I know there's the Alley Dar that they run coming up in August. I don't know if that's too soon, but later in the meet, there's the Woodward. And I don't know, is he ready for a race like the Woodward? The handicap division is in such a chaotic state right now that there's no real leader at this point. I'm sure he'll meet horses like Preservationist and Catholic Boy there. They still have something to prove themselves. But Hofburg, you're right. He's never really run that fast speed figure that says he's as good as those horses. And I don't doubt he can do it because he's got a right to take a step forward, second off the layoff. And perhaps the pace of this race didn't allow him to run as fast as he might have otherwise. But he's got quite a following. And if he's going to be a short price in these bigger grade 1, grade 2 races, just still want to see it before I believe it.
Yeah, I'm the same way, and it's going to come down to price with him. Given his reputation, I would suspect he'll probably point to a higher class race like the Woodward versus something like the Alley Dar. But who knows? We'll see what Bill Mott does with him, who shows up. He's a horse who, you never know. Maybe he's a horse. He looks like a closer, but maybe he's more comfortable in these slow-paced races. He's actually run a couple good ones in situations just like this. So I think there's a lot of questions about him, and he's one to follow. As wide open as the division is, as you say, it doesn't take much of a big step up to get yourself right up in the grade 1 competition. And I look forward to seeing him run again at the meet.
Sticking with those Jeremiah 2-year-olds, the final one we'll discuss of the three was the winner of the Stillwater Stakes earlier on the card on Thursday. They ran two 2-year-old stakes races for New York breds early in the week at Saratoga on Wednesday and Thursday. I'm not going to discuss the cold version because there just wasn't a whole lot of quality in there. But My Italian Rabbi and Fierce Lady, the two fillies, they put on quite a show in this Stillwater. Fierce Lady, I know, was a horse that a lot of people, myself included, were looking forward to coming back off her impressive debut win at Belmont. She didn't quite run back to that race, but more so than her regressing, My Italian Rabbi really took a step forward.
She did. She had run second first out with only a 71. But again, that was one of those 5 furlong races where, the shorter the race, the more the speed figures can vary. It doesn't take much to really knock your speed figure down a bit. She got a very nice 102 here. I was really impressed by the effort visually. Oh, no, I'm looking at the wrong one. I'm sorry. She got a 99. So very similar, but she had come off a 70 last time. And she did it by pressing a fast pace. We actually have the half mile coded in red with a 106 pace figure. And she was able to hang, just get up by a nose. Fierce Lady ran well. She had run the big speed figure first time out, which is why she was 1-5 in here. But again, when they start stretching out a little bit, it's hard to have a whole lot of confidence in those numbers. And I think you got to look a little deeper than that and go watch the races and form a visual impression as well.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, there was a lot of talk about Fierce Lady's preparation for this race because she actually did not have a timed workout between her debut and this race. You could see that for anybody to see in the form, and that's because her connections tried to sell her at one of the sales, I believe, down in Kentucky, and she shipped down there, then to ship back for this race, was out of trading for a week, and you just never want to see that between a couple of starts for a lightly raced 2-year-old, and who knows if that affected her performance here or if that's the reason why she lost this race. But just from a visual standpoint, this was not the same blazingly fast horse that we saw in the debut at Belmont. And hopefully with a more regular training regimen coming into her next race, she gets back to that brilliance that we saw first time out because she did not take the kind of step forward that we saw out of My Italian Rabbi. But they're two nice fillies. Even the third place finisher, Jewel of Arabia, who was a first-time starter in this race, she ran a respectable speed figure too. So I think there was some quality here. And we've seen this theme of the fillies running faster than the colts in some of these early season 2-year-old races, and that was certainly the case again early in the week at Saratoga. The final race I want to talk about from Wednesday's card is a maiden race where off the record won against a short field. It was an off the turf race, but it was an off the turf race that I believe featured 5 main track only horses that ran. So it was really more like a car to dirt race than a regular off the turf race. And off the record, this is a horse that, well, he didn't earn the fastest speed figure in this race. There's been a lot of buzz around this horse in Saratoga. I know Rodolphe Brissett has really said that he likes this horse quite a bit. And just from a visual standpoint, watching his trip, I like this performance.
Yeah, it was a good performance numerically and visually. He got a 107 for the win, which is, obviously very nice for a debut figure, even for a 3-year-old. We've been talking a lot about 2-year-olds, but certainly nothing wrong with this. He said, pressed a fast pace by the favorite. I don't remember which one. They were co-favorites, I think. The Chad Brown Azriel or something like that, who got a similar figure. And just basically a match race. But I thought it was impressive for a debut, particularly going 7 furlongs, which isn't always a great distance for horses making that first-time start. And I think both of the top 2 are ones to watch going forward.
I agree with that. I liked the way that Jose Ortiz rode the winner. He made the bettors a little bit nervous because I know a lot of people that bet this horse didn't like those tactics. But he gave the horse an education first time out. Took some dirt in his face, slotted in behind some horses, made him come through a really narrow opening on the rail inside of the second place finisher at the top of the stretch. And I think the winner off the record is really going to benefit from getting that experience first time out. Whereas a lot of these horses that show so much in the mornings, they just go to the lead and don't learn a whole lot in their debuts. And I think this horse really did. So there's some talent here. And he's a horse that has the pedigree to stretch out in the future. So he's one that I would watch down the line. We'll finish the show by moving on to Del Mar and talking about some of the races there from their opening week, beginning with the San Diego Stakes, which was won by Catalina Cruiser. Another short field, just 4 horses participated. Another pretty uncompetitive pace situation. I think all of the pace figures were color-coded blue in this race. And given that situation, I think you have to be a little disappointed with Catalina Cruiser's effort. I think a lot of us were looking for him to do more than he put forth on the track.
We were. Not knocking Mongolian Groom, the runner-up. He's a solid enough allowance horse, I guess you'd say. But given the slow pace that Catalina Cruiser was able to get away with, they were all coated in blue, as you say. And I expected him to run away from this field a little bit more in the stretch. The only win by a length with a final time figure of 121, knocked down the 118 because of the slow pace and the overall number by us. Just not blown away with him so far. He's come back this year and he's won both races, but it's kind of hard to get excited about the 116 and 118 he's run before. This was a horse who was running very fast figures last year. He went all favored in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. He obviously didn't run well that day, but I haven't really liked what I've seen, not just numerically, but just watching. He hasn't really looked like quite the same horse to me.
No, I would agree with that. And this was a horse that had earned a couple of 130 TimeformUS speed figures, I believe, going back to the last summer, really kind of suggesting he might have the potential to be one of the best handicap horses in the country. And it just hasn't panned out that way. He flopped in the Breeders' Cup last year. I guess you would have expected he'd move forward off the True North last time, and credit the connections for shipping out to New York and running him in that race. And while the True North was a competitive field, was it really a grade 1, grade 2 type of field? I think that's borderline, not the best horses in the country running in there. And he just didn't really step forward out of that race. And I agree. He was coming under a ride around the turn, even though they were just getting to the 6 furlong marker in 113. I mean, he should be doing that easily, given how much speed that he has. Maybe they just got him so switched off in the early going that he just lacked the brilliance that he shows in some of these shorter races. I think sometimes you can overrate these horses that are very naturally fast. But he was supposed to kick away from a horse like Mongolian Groom, who's okay, but not really at the grade 1, grade 2 level. And I think you have to really question at this point where this horse goes from here, because he's not at the grade 1 level running speed figures like this.
No, and I heard him mention the Pacific Classic, which I can say for sure that if he shows up there, he's a horse I'm going to be against, because I don't think he wants any parts of a 1.25 miles, even when he was in his best form. So, it'll be interesting. There's still time to change their mind. Maybe he'll show up somewhere else. But being a local horse, there's not a whole lot of options out there. So if that's a race he shows up in and where he'll surely take some money, I'll be looking to beat him for sure.
I agree with that, and not to harp on it too much, but I do think there's still some question how far this horse wants to go and whether he's really best as a sprinter, because I know he won the San Diego twice, and those were his only two races around two turns, but they were both pretty uncompetitive races against short fields, and he hasn't really proven that he's best as a two-turn horse yet, and I'm not totally convinced of that. I guess we'll learn a lot more in his next start, but it'll be interesting to see where he shows up. Another horse that was trying to get back to some of his better races we saw earlier in the day on Saturday at Del Mar, and that was American Anthem in an allowance race. This is a horse that I believe he won the Woody Stevens going back to his 3-year-old season before finishing, I want to say, third in the Allen Jerkins that same year, that Grade 1 race. And it's just been hard for Bob Baffert to really get him into the groove since then. He hasn't really gained a whole lot of momentum. I know he won a graded stakes somewhere along the way, but he has had trouble staying in training. Got back here from another short layoff, and he got the job done. Not the most visually impressive effort, not the fastest speed figure. He's going to have to do better in the future.
Yeah, he had won the San Carlos last year, grade 2 at Santa Anita. But I agree, he ran a 117 here. He ran okay. He did get a nice pace set up. He kind of sat off of a bit of a duel and was able to close late. This is a case where I actually gave the runner-up a 119 based on the pace, and I think he was the best horse in here in Flagstaff. The John Sadler trained 5-year-old. I think he's a gelding. Seems to be in good form. He won his first race off a pretty long layoff, and then he came back here with that nice 119 where he did, he got ran down late after dueling throughout the early part of the race. And if there's one in here that I won, he would be the one. I think the top two both ran okay, but just based on reputation and looking for value in the future, I was more impressed with Flagstaff.
I agree with that. Even watching the race, you could hear Trevor Denman sort of call the race like he thought Flagstaff had it won, and he just tied up a little bit at the end, or American Anthem found another gear. It was an honest pace up front that American Anthem was trying to close into. But I agree. I wasn't that thrilled with the winner. I thought the runner-up ran pretty well. Moving back to the stakes company on Sunday, the feature was the Eddie Reed, which is now a Grade 2 race. And the favorite in this race was Catapult, who has yet to win a race in 2019, though he did finish that really good second in the Breeders' Cup Mile last year. And Catapult's just been a frustrating horse, and I know he was favored in this race, and his best race would have gotten it done against a field like this, and he just didn't run his race, and it left the door open for a host of others. And the one that stepped through that door was Bowie's Hero, who got a good trip and just kicked away and won this race in pretty dominant fashion.
Yeah, this race was a little, I won't say crushing, because I did bet the winner in here. I didn't like Catapult. I haven't liked his form recently, but I actually had the first and third place finishers in the exacta and just got nipped by a flying Marquise Wooder, who kind of came from out of the picture watching on TV to get me late of a big exacta. But, again, it's California. It's solid enough. It's a Grade 2 now. This used to be a Grade 1 race. The winner got a 122, which is, about what he runs when he runs his good races, mid-120s. Solid effort. I think it was more the disappointments of Sharp Samurai and Catapult that were the story here. And they're two horses that just haven't been as good this year as they were last year. They keep getting bet on reputation, but until we see a reversal of form, these two they seem like they've lost a step, and I think the others are better. Marquise Wooder, who ran second, I think he's a horse who wants longer. He had won 1.25 miles graded stakes last time out. He was able to get second here, but he was never really a threat to the winner. But they took a shot, being 1.125 miles. They don't run 1.25 miles at Del Mar, so it's probably his best run there. So the top two were solid enough, and I imagine they'll show up in other stakes that we're going to see at Del Mar.
It's ironic that that's the horse that ran you down, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you liked him in the Whittingham last time when he won at a price. Yeah, Bowie's Hero, he's a nice horse. I don't want to take anything away from him. Phil D'Amato's done a good job getting him back to his best form. He actually ran pretty well in the Shoemaker going back to May, when he closed into a race that just didn't really favor horses with that style when Bolo wired that field. So he's been in good form, and it's nice to see him get this win. But I agree with you with what you're suggesting, that the fact that horses like Marquise Water and Ritzy AP were second and third just don't really suggest that these California horses are towards the top of the division. And I think we've seen that over the past few years, and that trend is holding still. Another stakes race on the turf from Del Mar last weekend was the San Clemente for the 3-year-old fillies, same division that we saw in the Lake George at Saratoga. And not the fastest speed figure, but a fun race to watch, as Mutual Unusual took advantage of a favorable pace scenario to come from last place and just loop the field to win.
Yeah, and when you say favorable, we did have the half-mile pace figure in red, but I think if you just look at our chart and you look at the lengths back of the top three finishers, it's pretty obvious that this race set up for closers. The first three were 10th, 9th, and 7th, and not just position-wise, they were all well back, and they came running late to get up. The second finisher, Apache Princess, so it was 17-1. So it's not like they were all favorites either. Overemphasized was 8-1. The speed figure for the winner and second place finishers were 106. Third got a 105. So anytime you see it, not great speed figures, tightly bunched. I don't think it was a very strong race. So I think your description of it as a fun race is probably more appropriate here.
Yeah, it's amazing to watch how differently the riders have to adjust to the races at Del Mar as opposed to some of the same turf stakes that they run at a track like Saratoga, because you really do have to launch your move earlier, given how short the stretch is at Del Mar. Horses that want to be saving ground, they've got to get off the rail and sort of get around these horses before they even get to the stretch. And I saw Joel Rosario do that perfectly with the winner, Mutual Unusual, who was saving ground at the back of the pack, and he really tipped her off about midway around the bar turn. It got into position, and it was the right move because the pace did fall apart ahead of him, and some other horses got sort of trapped in traffic inside, and that made the difference for him. And this filly got the job done. She's been in good form. She's now 3 for 3 on the turf, but not the best 3-year-old fillies in the country, which sort of has been the trend with these turf horses in California, as we were saying. Sticking with the stakes races out of Del Mar, another one on the turf, this one for the fillies, the Yosemite Stakes. Just want to mention this race because of the winner, Ahimsa. She was coming off a grade 1 placing in the Gamely last time, and she got a stakes win here. Don't have a whole lot to say about this race. She got to control up front, and I just thought she looked pretty good.
Yeah, she had actually got a 120 speed figure last time out when she got that grade 1 placing. She only got a 113 here, but I do think she kind of controlled the race from the start. She set solid enough fractions. They weren't slow, they weren't fast. And she was pulling away late, so she did what she had to do here. She wasn't beating the strongest competition. Solid effort. I imagine she'll be moving back into graded stakes competition next out.
Yeah, seems like a horse that turning her into a front runner has really made the difference in her career, because they had ridden her from off the pace in prior starts, and this year they've just gone to the front with her, and she's really responded well to that. And it's nice to have that weapon on the turf. And yeah, she'll move into tougher company in the future. This was not the toughest field for her to beat in this minor stakes race. Final race we'll talk about from last week at Del Mar, and the final race we'll talk about on the podcast this week was an allowance race for 3-year-olds and up on Wednesday, going 6.5 furlongs, where King Jack got the better of some older horses. This horse was coming off an impressive debut win. He's now 2 for 2 in his career, and he earned a pretty respectable speed figure for a 3-year-old.
Yeah, he did. And he was coming out of a race where the runner-up, I forget the name, it's a Bob Baffert horse, had come back and run very well and broke his maiden impressively. And I remember thinking at the time, well, where's King Jack been? Where's he going to show up? I think he was formerly trained by Jerry Hollendorfer. I don't want to get into that whole mess. But he switched to the barn of Dennis Ward, I believe his name, and he ran a really nice 114, improved upon his 107 the first time out. So he's a horse where, the sky's the limit right now. He looks like a really good sprinter. I imagine he'll be moving into stakes competition next out, and I'm really curious where he'll show up. I don't think they run a whole lot of 3-year-old races at Del Mar, even in the stakes division. So he's either going to have to move on to take olders or take on older, or he's going to have to ship somewhere else or wait for Santa Anita. But there's no doubt he's a talented runner.
Yeah, he has every right to move up in class off a race like this, because he got the 114 TimeformUS speed figure, but he actually got a 119 final time figure that was adjusted down a little bit because the middle fractions of this race were on the slower side and he was setting that pace. But a really encouraging effort from him, because the runner-up, Candy Cornell, really took a run at him coming up the rail at the top of the stretch and almost looked like he was making a winning move. And King Jack, when he was called upon, really just battled back and fought off that horse. And you want to see that kind of tenacity with these young horses, and he was able to just show the grit to get the win in this race. He's got a big pedigree. He's by Jimmy Creed. The dam is actually a half-sister to Tar Heel Mom, who was a good dirt sprinter for, I believe, Stanley Huff a number of years ago, as well as Scrappy T, who was the aggressor in that infamous Fleet Alex incident in the Preakness going back to 2005. So there's real pedigree here on the dam side as well, and just seems like a horse that has a real future ahead of him. And hopefully they don't move him up into stakes company too soon. And I don't know if a race like the Allen Jerkins would be one that they'd consider coming to East for, but based on the speed figure he's running, he certainly has a right to be in races like that at some point.
Yeah, he is. I want to mention I looked up the trainer's name as Dan Ward. He's a new guy who didn't have any record in our past performances, but we don't want to slight him here when he's got a good quality horse like this.
Well, those are all the races we got to discuss on the podcast this week. There's a ton of great racing coming our way next week, as is always the case at this time of the year with Del Mar and Saratoga in action. So we'll cover all of those races and recap them on the podcast next week. For now, you can listen to us, as always, on dref.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or SoundCloud. Just make sure you subscribe to the Daily Racing Form podcast, and we are the TimeformUS Pacecast. So thanks for listening this week, guys, and we'll catch up with you again next week.